Okay, good morning to everyone. Welcome to this official COP side event on NDC Accounting of GHG emissions. We will present you and discuss with you first-hand experiences from pilot activities. I'd like to shortly introduce myself. My name is Daniel Blank. I work with GIZ, the German Development Corporation, in a project supporting Costa Rica, Colombia and Mexico in the establishment of pilot accounting systems. I will be your moderator for today for this event. I'm happy to also present you the Federal Minister for the Environment, Ms. Barbara Hendricks, who is with us and will give some opening remarks. And also the Environmental Minister from Costa Rica, Edgar Gutierrez. Bienvenido. And also Kirsten Orscholuk from the Federal Ministry for the Environment of Germany, BMUB. And Jakob Greichen from the Institute for Applied Ecology, Öko-Institut from Berlin. We will start our event with some opening remarks. I hope we can have a fruitful event, finish this strongly. As my virtual yoga trainer always tells me, it's the last day. I'm sure you have already worked a lot and heard a lot, but I'm rather sure that you will still hear something new today. NDC Accounting, it's the first event we have on this very important new topic arising from the Paris Agreement. So please enjoy the event, and I would like to ask now Mrs. Barbara Hendricks to give her opening speech on behalf of the Federal Ministry for the Environment of Germany.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Franz, Edgar. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words at your side event. I would like to take this opportunity to once again highlight two aspects. Firstly, we all need to pull together to achieve our climate targets. To do this, close cooperation is crucial. It is also through cooperation that we build mutual trust. We have enjoyed close and constructive cooperation with Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia for many years, for example, through the International Climate Initiative. However, I would like to focus on the host country of this side event. Even before COP21 in Paris, Costa Rica announced its intention to become greenhouse gas neutral by 2020. This is an ambitious step and, of course, a difficult one. And I'm pleased that we are able to help Costa Rica on its journey to achieving this goal. Costa Rica is also showing us how climate action can be improved through widespread involvement of the public. The Costa Rican National Pact for the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda and the inclusive development of the NDCs are excellent examples of non-government stakeholder involvement. The consultation process with the Costa Rican population on the implementation of the 2030 Agenda shows how, together, we can achieve our targets through close and constructive cooperation. Climate action and sustainable development can only be successful if we pull together. The second aspect I want to briefly mention is the role of transparency in building trust between the parties to the Paris Agreement. Cooperation between Costa Rica and Germany is based on mutual respect and trust. Exchanges between countries strengthen this trust and set a process of mutual learning in motion. In these exchanges, we need to have reliable figures, data and facts to be able to judge if we are on track for achieving our 2-degree target. Although figures, data and facts may sound boring, they are the foundation of mutual trust. Of course, the negotiations on the topic of transparency have not yet been concluded. The process of developing balanced joint guidelines will take time and will have to be concluded during COP24 in Poland. Our negotiations need the support of countries like Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia that today are already thinking about how to breathe life into the Paris Agreement. To establish trust, we need robust and practical solutions. We can only achieve this by working together. On that note, I would like to thank you again for inviting me to this event, and I wish you, Edgar, every success in implementing these ambitious targets. And I wish you all an interesting event filled with lots of new insights. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Federal Minister Hendricks, for these opening remarks. And I'd say that in this podium, in this panel, we have big fans of facts and figures, and even Minister Gutierrez from Costa Rica, he's a statistician, so he's definitely a friend of figures. And I'd say that also within the group of panelists we will have today, that there are more friends in figures. And we hope that we can convince others about the importance of having a proper accounting. It's a pleasure to have you here, Edgar. I dare to say that as we have met some years ago in Costa Rica in a project context, when Minister Gutierrez also told me about his vision to have a complete accounting system that would tell him easily, quickly, maybe with a red light, a green light, if Costa Rica is on track to achieving its national NDC mitigation target. We are all working to having systems that can provide such information. Costa Rica, I think, always has been a visionary country. Federal Minister Hendricks already mentioned the vision of becoming carbon neutral. So in this sense, we are honored to receive your opening remarks, and the floor is yours.
Thank you indeed for your kind words. Esteemed dear Minister Hendricks, colleagues all, it is a pleasure for me to share with you just a few words today. I thought it was important for me to be here today to thank German Cooperation Agency, GIZ, for their support in advancing our national climate change metric system. We call this system CINAMEC. Through the Accounting Rules project, we have been able to set the foundations of a system that will integrate our mitigation actions in our national accounting for strengthening the national greenhouse gas inventory. With your support, we are very close to promulgating an executive decree to define the operation of the system and to be prepared well in advance to implement the transparency provision of Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. In particular, given that our NDC goal is in absolute target, we want to ensure that the great effort we are putting on the ground for mitigating climate change is reflected in our greenhouse gas inventory. Our goal is set for the year 2030, and we expect to have the CINAMEC ready much sooner, so we are able also to develop similar modules for adaptation, means of implementation, and co-benefits. In this context, I wanted to make ourselves accessible to share lessons learned with other countries and to continue collaborating with GIZ to constructing the building blocks of transparency system. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and again, I wish to express my gratitude with Germany, with its people, and for their support. Thank you very much indeed, Barbara. We're going to miss you. We are going to miss you much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Gutierrez, for these opening remarks. Before continuing, I would also like to mention that this event has been proposed and is hosted by Costa Rica and the Öko-Institut, the Institute for Applied Ecology. And both are cooperating within this project that has already been kindly mentioned by Mr. Gutierrez. Before proceeding, giving the word to Jakob Greichen as the second host, I would like to hand over to Kirsten Orscheluk, who is advisor at the Federal Ministry for the Environment. As I know, she has always also been a big promoter of MRV transparency topics, and I'd dare to say that she's also a fan of facts and figures. And I invite you to give your opening remarks as well.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I can't add a lot more to the two very grateful statements in the beginning. I just have the honor to give a little inside view for the International Climate Initiative, which I am also in charge for. But before, I also would like to thank Costa Rica and the colleagues for to be the front runner for the Gender Action Plan. Because of you, we have this great achievement this year. Thank you very much. So regarding the IKI from our perspective, from the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, we are a huge supporter regarding transparency and MRV systems. For us, the NDC implementation is closely interlinked with transparency. You need data, facts, and figures to show the results to the politicians, for example, for the ministers, what you have achieved regarding climate change. So therefore, you need data, facts, and figures in a timely manner and with a high quality. Additionally, you need also these results for a dialogue on a domestic level. Therefore, we are also very happy in the cooperation with the IKI to support countries that they are able to discuss with their other stakeholders on a domestic level what they have achieved, what are the results, what are the adjustments. Are we still on track with the NDC implementation? And therefore, let me highlight a few other initiatives before I come to this very great project, which we are here now. For example, in 2010, Germany, South Africa, and the Republic of Korea founded the International Partnership on Mitigation and MRV. It was after the COP in Copenhagen to support the process in the long run to Paris. After Paris, the agreement which we achieved in 2015, we as partners agreed to have a new transparency partnership to support the negotiations regarding transparency. Another highlight is from the IKI perspective, the NDC cluster, where we combine all implementation organizations who are in charge for NDC projects. And there we have also a working group on transparency and data. And therefore, I would like to invite every country representative who's here to contact the colleagues to get more support, more inside views, more exchange about how we can implement NDCs with a robust and transparent manner. And the last highlight is the initiative on climate action and transparency. It was established after the COP in Paris, and therefore the beauty of this project is it works closely together methodologies and tailor-made in-country work. So also there we are very proud that we can support this initiative. But now let me say a few words about this little jewel which we have here in our IKI portfolio, the NDC Accounting project. It started a little bit before the time. It had some adjustments in the meantime. And now with the negotiations, I think we are all aware with NDC Accounting Project, we are very happy to be part of this development to support countries, for example, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia, that it's practical and you can implement an NDC accounting system. It's nothing what you need to fear, because transparency should not be a burden for countries, it should be a help for the national domestic dialogues and also for the international topics. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for this motivating speech, and especially your last sentence that accounting and transparency should not be a burden but a help. I like this quite a lot, and I might cite this in other events if you allow me to do. Now I'm very glad to hear some remarks from Jakob Greichen, senior researcher at the Öko-Institut, because after having heard so much about accounting and it's important, and actually the United Nations Development Program in a publication once stated that it's considered or can be considered one of the 5 central pillars for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, besides the 2-degree goal, the NDCs, finance, adaptation. So we still need to hear what it's actually about, and this is where I would like to hand over to Jakob so he can present a bit more on NDC accounting itself and why we are discussing actually this topic. Thanks, Jakob.
Thank you, Daniel. Kirsten, can you give me the box to advance the slides? Thank you. So, welcome everyone to our side event hosted together with Costa Rica. Öko-Institut is working with GIZ on this project, and we are providing the technical background and advice to our partners in the 3 countries in Mexico, Costa Rica, and Colombia. And I'll give a short introduction into what is accounting and why is it important. I assume most of you know all of this here, so I'll keep it short. And later on, we will then also hear on the advances on this session, during the session, and what we could expect next year. So as a background information, this project was old. We started developing it when Copenhagen pledges were still the latest in commitments. And that introduced new types of commitments into the system, which went way beyond what we had in Kyoto, where everyone just had a common type of target, X% against the baseline. And now we have a multitude of different types of targets. And of course, that means that the accounting system of the Kyoto Protocol cannot be applied one-to-one on the new system. So the idea of this project was to generate real-life experiences, how accounting of these new target types could be develop and implement, how they could look like, both to feed into this process, because it's always good to have concrete examples and experiences when you develop rules and guidelines, but also to help, of course, the participating countries in building up their own capacities in implementing accounting systems. So it's a project, a regional project with Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia, funded by the BMUB IKI. Thank you very much for that support. And implemented by GIZ and us. So what is accounting about? It sounds a bit boring. It sounds like figures, numbers, and bookkeeping, and that is part of it, but it's also quite interesting and relevant. The question is basically, how do we know if a country has achieved its target? And having a good target is very important, of course, but at the same time, it's not useful to have a very ambitious target if at the end we don't achieve that target. And we already heard about trust from the speeches from Barbara Hendricks and Edgar. So trust is very important, and knowing that the other countries are doing their part and believing that the other countries are doing their part for climate change is really crucial. So this is what accounting is really about. And we broke it down in basically 4 steps. The first step is to clearly define what is actually my target, what do I really want, and I give 2 or 3 examples from the project afterwards on all of these questions. Then the second question is, how do I measure my progress towards this target? So what data do I need, how do I calculate this? which then feeds already into the next question, what do I need in terms of input? And then, of course, with all of that, I can determine where am I, have I achieved my target, how far am I, what is still missing. And of course, there's a very close link between MIV systems and accounting. Basically, the MIV systems provide the data we need to be able to do that in the accounting system. And although a lot is still unclear about how accounting is going to be, is all part of the transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. So, and there are few principles in there in all the past years of the convention that apply as well to what is expected to come out. So we're looking at things like continuous improvement, where it's not a static system. You start somewhere and you evolve, and then you learn, and then you improve whatever you're doing. We want to promote transparency, accuracy, completeness, consistency, and comparability. The environmental integrity is very crucial to accounting system. That includes, for example, that there is no double counting. The same reductions cannot be counted by 2 countries or twice in the same country. Of course, we also don't want to lose the reduction. So if Costa Rica has achieved something, of course, then they want also be able to show it and see it and report on it. And of course, a very important issue is the flexibility. The countries are very different. We have a broad range of commitments, of capabilities, and on national systems on reporting. So there has to be pretty broad in that sense, the accounting system, to be able to work with all these issues. And on the accounting system itself, the Paris Agreement has a few points, basically, that they should conform with the methodologies and metrics assessed by the IPCC. The crucial point, there should be consistency between your accounting system, your target, and your baseline or your reference year. So for example, Mexico has a target against the business as usual development. So the methodologies to use to do the business as usual development should be consistent with the ones they use to measure their emissions at the end, to make these 2 figures comparable. All source and sinks should be included, and again, crucial, once they're in, they should always stay inside the system. So some countries have not started with the all sectors or all gases, but it's a process, again, where industrialized countries have to include everything. All other countries are invited to, but it's also a gradual improvement. Here we go. So the 4 steps, I said, I'm going to give a few examples from the project, concrete examples from the projects on the questions we looked at now. What do I really want? So what is my target? Mexico and Colombia both have a target against a business as usual development, a deviation. So their big question is that BAU static? So is it the one they published in the NDC when they submitted the NDC, or is it going to be updated in 5 years' time when they have better real-life data and can do improved baseline? And then again, if it is updated, under which circumstances? Because, of course, in theory, a country could come in 2028 when they see they have a problem and publish a new business as usual development, which is very high, and then suddenly they meet their target. This, of course, would not be very transparent and credible. So the idea here was to look at conditions and criteria and which moment such a revision of a baseline might be relevant. Costa Rica has a target fixed in tons of CO2, so it's not against the business as usual development. There, one question was, for example, what happens if they improve their methodologies and they change their inventories because they have better data, they have more experience? Does that affect the target, or will the target remain unchanged? And another question we looked at together with our partners is the climate neutrality target, which for 2021, if I understand it correctly. And what is the relationship of that target towards the NDC target, and what is the exact definition of climate neutrality? So that was a lot of work we did there. A special case for Mexico is they have 2 targets in the NDC. They have one greenhouse gas target, and they have a target on reducing emissions from black carbon. because black carbon both is a climate, has impacts on climate change, but also a high impact on air quality and health. So for many reasons, Mexico said we want to have both targets, and they also have a combined target. So the question there was, or is, are these targets separate targets which need to be achieved both individually, or is it one joint target that can, overachieving one target can compensate well, not unachieving, but together they have to achieve their target, or is each target an individual target? And how then do I measure my advances? Of course, land use and deforestation is a tricky topic. I'm not going to delve into that. My colleague Anke Herold, who will be on the panel later, is our expert on that, and if you want to discuss that, please wait for her. The other question I already mentioned, how do you ensure consistency between your baseline or your historic base year and your actual emission calculations towards the end of the 2030 period? And another interesting question for those countries who have a target against business as usual is, in theory, you have a baseline, then you do your policies and measures. These policies and measures reduce your emissions, and what is left is your national emissions. So in a perfect world, the three would add up. You have your baseline, the effects of your policies and measures, and the difference is then your inventory. In the real world, the baseline is uncertain. We cannot quantify policies and measures, not all of them, and those we do quantify have uncertainties. The inventory is relatively certain, but still is not perfect. So these figures never add up at the end. So the question is, how can we bring them more or less together? Is it plausible? What do we report and which way? So the third question then is, what do I actually need based on the target and how we're going to calculate the advancement towards the target? Then we can also see which requirements we have. For example, which IPCC guidelines, is it the 1996 guidelines or the 2006 guidelines? Which global warming potentials? In the NDC, we have everything from the second assessment report to the fifth assessment reports over all of the countries that submitted NDCs. Then an important question, again, which we started with Costa Rica was, are the inventories actually good enough to capture my policies and measures? So we did an analysis there of the key policies that Costa Rica developed, and then looked at the inventory. Would the effect of this policy actually be captured in the inventory and then also reported and part of the contribution of what you can show that you have achieved or not? And of course, apart from all these number crunching questions, the big question is always which institution is doing these activities, what are the responsibilities, what are the timelines, and so it's, in addition to the technical questions, is also a process and a good governance question which also needs to be addressed. I would like to thank everyone who we have been working with in the last years, and welcome to the event.
Okay. Okay, with this rather technical inputs, I'd like to close the first round of panelists. Thanks again, Mr. Gutierrez, for your presence and your opening remarks. Thanks for hosting this event. Thanks to the Öko-Institut as well for hosting this event, and thanks also for BMUB, represented by Kirsten Orscheluk in this event, for the opening remarks. I'd now like to open the second round, where we will have some country presentations. Maybe we can have the slide with the agenda on the screen. I'd like to call Mr. Javier Fernandez from Costa Rica on the podium, and Mrs. Camila Rodriguez from Colombia, Ms. Claudia Octaviano from Mexico, and also Riyad Balaghi from Morocco. Okay, we will first Here a presentation. I have a presentation by Javier Fernandez, who works with the Ministry for the Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. I think we can say that Mr. Fernandez also was one of the great pushers and initiators behind the system for the national climate change metrics, which was mentioned by Mr. Gutierrez in the beginning. I'll directly hand over to you, Javier. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. And good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here. It's always an honor for me to be here with my dear minister. And it's also an honor for me to talk to you about CINAMEC. So as you see on the screen, CINAMEC is the National Climate Change Metric System. It's something that we've been working on for some time now, really ever since we came up with the NDC, because we needed a system to keep track of what we were doing. We needed a system to make sure that what we were doing was transparent, and we needed a system to share information with the people. So first, let me say thank you to GIZ for allowing us to be here. Like Kristen said, it is a little jewel. This project is a little jewel. I think there's a lot to be learned from it, and I think there's a lot to be shared with other countries beyond Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia. We've also made strong friendships through this project. A lot of colleagues here, we've been working on this for a while, and with Anke as well. We've formed this group of people, and it's been very good from different points of view. So how do I change the slide? Okay. Good. All right, so what is CINAMEC? It's a system to measure and report Costa Rica's progress in implementing climate change action, including our NDC, but also our local climate change policies. Because of our NDC target, it is mostly based on the harmonization of mitigation actions with the greenhouse gas inventory to reflect our progress in the overall mitigation plan. Eventually, it will go beyond mitigation and will incorporate other modules. I will show you what those other modules are, but basically adaptation, co-benefits, and means of implementation. And the system is currently in design. It's not an easy system to design. It has a lot of complexities to it, but it's expected to be operational at least in a beta fashion in the first part of 2018. So before the CINAMEC was even conceived, this is what we had to work with. We have a national climate change strategy from 2009. We have a climate neutrality program that was born in 2012. Our NDC that was shared with everyone and officialized in 2015 has a 2030 goal and a long-term low-carbon strategy that we're planning on presenting in line with the timeline set in the Paris Agreement. For all of these actions and goals that we have, we needed a way also to keep track of that, but also the financing that we needed, capacity building that's needed as well, and the technology transfer if necessary. All of those, as you know, are called means of implementation. So this is sort of the universe of the things that we needed to keep track of. Now, most importantly, and as a reminder of our NDC, which is basically sets a trajectory from 2012 all the way to 2085 on how to keep our emissions below the threshold of the 2-degree limit. So this is, of course, something that we need to keep track of. I just want to highlight that our goal is for 2030, and it's in absolute emissions. This is a key fact to understand why we're doing some of the things that we're doing right now. So hopefully, eventually, we'll have a CINAMEC operating on different modules with mitigation, adaptation, means of implementation, and co-benefits. We have good progress in mitigation, largely thanks to this project. We are beginning to work on the adaptation module. All of that we consider to be climate action at some point. We are going to transition to that concept in terms of data. We're also trying to start working on means of implementation, especially with financial support received. This is already a lot of work that needs to be done, so we're progressing as much as possible. And also on co-benefits, all of those things that happen and are positive thanks to the implementation of climate action. And really what takes CINAMEC to a different level in terms of going beyond a metric system is that we're planning on using that data to modify and impact policy and change policy actions in different sectors. So basically, we're going to have a module dedicated to policy analysis and forecasting. So this is going beyond just collecting data to using data to impact policy. So let's just focus for a second on mitigation, because this is where we're making a lot more progress right now. I think conceptually it's more clear, and because we have an NDC goal that is based on, it's defined as total emissions, tons of CO2 equivalent for a specific year, then we decided to work on this more directly at first. So first of all, we have mitigation actions, and we have actions in different sectors. They were occurring at different speeds with different levels of progress, and we wanted, as a first step, to register those actions. We wanted to know where those actions were. Okay, that was important for us also in the eventual definition of ITMOs, or units. So at some point, ITMOs will be linked to this registry and the mitigation actions that are registered there. So as a second step, what we wanted to do is to harmonize those mitigation actions with the greenhouse gas inventory, and that sounds very easy to do, but it's not. It's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of commitment, not only from the team that compiles the greenhouse gas inventory, but also from the people and the ministries and the private sector actually implementing these actions. So this is something that we did thanks to the project with the GIZ, and we were able to come up with guidelines for all sectors to be able to harmonize their actions and their MRV with the greenhouse gas inventory. And that is all very technical, but it is actually a crucial step so we can reflect our efforts in the greenhouse gas inventory. So after that, the goal is to define progress indicators, not only in terms of greenhouse gases, but also in terms of other types of indicators that can let us know if our mitigation actions are progressing in the way that we want. And after that, we're going to have all of this information accessible to everyone. And for this reason, we are building a digital platform that is going to be free access, open software, and based on Costa Rican code. and it's going to be accessible by all of you. So just a quick, just to dive in a little bit more on the harmonization and mitigation actions, because this is really where the accounting occurs for us. We did, also with support from the Oeko-Institut and with GIZ, we implemented this set of guidelines with the current mitigation actions. For example, the coffee NAMA, but also with the RED strategy and the livestock NAMA. And basically what we did is we went with them through this process of harmonizing and coming up with a plan to harmonize their mitigation actions in their MRV with the greenhouse gas inventory. So we basically tested how these actions would be registered, and we came up with plans for harmonizing these actions. And if everything goes well, all of this will be reflected in the second biannual update report to the UNFCCC that would be submitted next year in line with the greenhouse gas inventory. So these are some of the first steps that we're making. Sorry, the first steps that we're taking to make sure that all of the effort on the ground will be reflected in our inventory and the reporting that we do before the UNFCCC. So that's all measurement and reporting, and that's all very good. That's also accounting. But we're also interested in looking at the future. We have, like you saw, a very ambitious NDC with net emissions dropping to zero at year 2085. That is highly ambitious, but it is what we need. But to do that, we need to know if we're going in the right direction. So we want to build a policy analysis and forecasting module within CINAMEC. That would work in the following way. So you would have BTRs, which are basically the biannual transparency reports, or however those are called at the end of when we define the MPGs under Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. So those would likely occur every 2 years, and we have government development plans that occur every 4 years. The ideal situation is that the reporting of our progress and the planning are at some point matched, so we can start modifying our policies to comply with our NDC. I have 1 minute. Okay. I have one more slide. That's fine. So this looks a little bit like this. So we have a trajectory, and we just want to make sure that we're going in the right direction. And if emissions, for example, start to go up, we're able to quickly adjust that in time. There's certain limitations to that, certain challenges. First of all, harmonizing small-scale mitigation actions is very difficult. It can be very costly, but in the end, everything counts. So we'll do our best. Some of the processes to obtain funding for this are a bit slow. I think we're all familiar with that. And this is crucial to keep the periodicity and the matching of the timelines here. So it's something to think about. Also, it's difficult to redirect some policies, change some paradigms, but that's what we're trying to do. And of course, data sharing is also a bit tricky, even amongst ourselves. This is something that we should start to change. I think after Paris, data sharing is absolutely crucial. It brings about collaboration and ensures transparency to a certain extent. And of course, the CINAMEC needs to be, to a certain extent, flexible to accommodate the future version of the MPGs, because this is something that is being negotiated right now. So that is CINAMEC. this is what I want to share with you, and of course, at some point we'll receive any questions. I think.
Thanks a lot, Javier, for your presentation, and sorry for monitoring even your time here. I directly hand over to Camila Rodriguez, who works with the Ministry for the Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. And she will also give us a presentation on another platform and quite comprehensive system. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. I first want to thank again to Daniel, to the Accounting Rules Project, the GIZ, and the government of Costa Rica for this invitation here today to present the work of Colombia. I will begin with a broad panorama of the climate change national policy in Colombia. We have in the country 5 strategic components in our policy, which was released at the end of the last year. The rural development, urban development, energy development, infrastructure, and ecosystems management and conservation, all, of course, low carbon and resilient, for the low carbon and resilient development. And also we have 4 cross-cutting components, the planification one, the information, science, technology, and investigation one, research, education, and finance for climate change. We have created the National Climate Change System, which is the institutional arrangement for manage the climate change in Colombia. And we call it CISCLIMA. The CISCLIMA has an intersectorial commission for climate change, which is the space where all the ministers of the country, the sectorial ministers, and the National Planning Department also meet together and try to discuss and take decisions about how to address climate change issues in the country. This is our sectorial coordination. And then we have also 9 regional clusters for the regional coordination in the country. And they convoke a lot of different stakeholders from the regions, just like the local governments, and also the environmental management institutions in the country. And then we have 4 more committees, the technical one, the finance, one for the foreign affairs, and the most important for us today here, which is the information committee. Here is where we have been discussing for the last year all our MRB system issues and also our monitoring and evaluation system for adaptation in the country. We have here persons from different institutions in the country, institutions which produce or give information to the ministers, the sectorial ministers, and also to the environmental minister of Colombia, and try to make sense of all this information in the context of climate change. Well, and this is part of what we have been discussing here, how to track progress of our NDC. We have a VAU deviation target, as Jacob mentioned before. Our base year for our NDC is 2010, and it includes all the sector of the economy. And to try to understand how to track progress of our NDC, we have been working on the building of the MRB's national system, which has 3 main components. The emissions one, which is led by IDEAM, which is the National Institute of Hydrology, Meteorology, and Environmental Studies. IDEAM is the national responsible in Colombia for the reports to the UNFCCC about climate change. So they're in charge of the elaboration of the GHG inventories And they have been doing a lot of efforts to have not just a national GHG inventory, but a regional, but different regionals inventories for the country, and try to give better information for the decision making. And also we have been working here with the private sector on a program for voluntary reporting of the corporate GHG emissions for the different industries, or it's most focused on industry. We have been working here also in the systematization of the elaboration of the national GHG inventories, trying to build a more systematic process and more standardized process for the elaboration of this kind of these reports. Then we have our second component of the MRB, which is the mitigation one. We have been creating here, or building, a national registry for mitigation actions, which aims to gather information from NAMAs, the CDM projects, RED projects and programs, and some other projects for low carbon development. We have been developing here also some guidelines for the formulation of the projects. And then we have the third component, the climate finance, which aims to track the climate finance at international and national level from public and private sources. So we have been working on the accountability elements that we need for the tracking progress of our NDC. And we have different elements that we think that are very important in the accountability process and for Colombia. This also depends on the type of the target that the country has and the local conditions that we have. But for us, we have been working a lot on the GHG national and sectoral emissions baselines. For this, we had to talk a lot with our sectorial ministries about, okay, which means this for IPCC categories that we report in our national inventories. Because for them, they see like, okay, there is an energy category, but what does it mean? What does it mean for me? For the transport ministry, for example, or something like that. So IDEM, in its last inventory, published also this homologation of the emissions in the country, trying to understand how the four main categories of the IPCC what they mean for the sectoral ministries in the country. So the right side of that graph, you see like the transport sector, waste sector, mines and energy sector, which are our national ministries. And we have been working a lot here trying to clarify data sources, for example, base year, information, the main categories, emission factors, activity factors, that this kind of information came to the GHG inventory like in a very different levels of aggregation for different sectors, and they have different quality of the data, so it has been very difficult to try to understand how and where is this being information produced in the country. So we have also working a lot to understand the methodological changes, for example, between the IPCC guidelines from one set of guidelines to the another. And then we have our second element for the accountability, which includes a lot of things. It's all the mitigation and mitigation policies and actions in the country. So we have first the baseline, and now we have to understand how these mitigation actions and policies are being implemented in the territory by each sector or by each local government, and how they are building their own baselines. and which assumptions are they having to calculate the reduction of the emissions, which categories are they using, which sectorial data are they using, and, for example, how to see these actions and policies reflected in the national GHG inventory. So we have a mitigation action in the territory, but we need to understand how it is reflected in the national GHG inventory. And also we have all the methodological information about projections, assumptions, different drivers, etc. This is like a simplification of our NDC, which we like to show you the different elements that are important for us, but the ones that I've been talking about. And here we have like a representation of how these elements have been reflected on different components of the information system in Colombia, because we now have to build an accountability system, an accounting system, and monitoring system, which give us useful information for the decision making in the country. But we have a lot of existing systems in the country, so we don't just like try to begin from zero. We have to recognize all the existing things and try to improve the existing things, and then try to interoperate them and try to build what we need, or where we have gaps, try to build up upon that. So we have the SINGE, which is this national GHG inventory for the country, like the systematization and the system that we are thinking that is going to make the national GHG inventories in a more systematic way. And we have been working here with the EDM in the information collecting protocols, file and data and processing information protocols. This all is trying to give us a more standardized information and more standardized methods for the calculations of the GHG national inventory. And also we have the NDC system, which includes a lot of things. For example, the baseline and projections and goals that we have in the country right now, and try to make this like in a more dynamic nature. We know that we are going to have some changes there, and that we have to deal with a lot of things that we are negotiating right now here, for example, and to deal with the improvements of the information, for example, in the country. So we have to have a system which can adapt to all these changes. And we have the National Registry for the Mitigation Actions, which I mentioned before. So we are trying to have here a system which allows us to update our information, to give us input for the reports on the progress of the implementation of the NDC, and to have indicators that, as Javier mentioned before, not just CO2 indicators, but also another kind of indicators that give us an idea about how our implementation actions and policies are being addressed in the country. And that's all about our system right now. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions.
Thanks a lot, Camilla, and it's a very important point. If you have questions, please keep them. All our panelists will remain on the podium, and we will have a round of questions afterwards. Now I would like you to introduce you with Claudia Octaviano. She's the General Coordinator for Climate Change Mitigation at Mexico's National Institute for Ecology and Climate Change. And it's the office which is responsible for the national GHG emissions inventory and the technical analysis of the mitigation component of the NDC. And Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank Costa Rica and the government of Germany, GIZ, for the invitation to Mexico to participate in this side event. I'm going to touch briefly on Mexico's NDC and how we are seeing the accounting discussions, the accounting systems under the Paris Agreement. So I will start first by sharing with you that Mexico has been trying to engage very productively in the discussion since the beginning of the new agreement. Mexico was the first developing country that submitted its NDC and has also submitted last year in Marrakesh its mid-century strategy. So we have a mitigation goal, as Jacob and Daniel referred before, that is a 22% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to the 2030 business as usual baseline, and a 51% reduction of black carbon in the same time frame. There was a question quickly, and I think maybe I should share with you that these are different targets, so we are not thinking about, let's say, trading black carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, but we do think black carbon it's an important climate forcer, and it's important for developing countries to start increasing action on black carbon and trying to address this issue while they address climate policy. And I'll touch a little bit more later on the methodological issues surrounding the black carbon question. But those are different targets, and what we want to convey is that it's important to, of course, commit on the greenhouse gas issue, but also put all the measures on the table that will be important to increase our ambition. And of course, also for the long term, we have in the mid-century strategy a 50% reduction goal to 2050, and this is compared to 2000 year. So this is the way that things will have to move. This is already in our general law for climate change. So this is it has a legal framework in the country too. And our NDC also has an adaptation component. It has three main lines of action. It's to do policies to reduce by 50% the number of municipalities that are currently cataloged as vulnerable in our country. It has a strong component of ecosystems-based adaptation. So if you see our NDC, it actually has the RED strategy and many of our conservation strategies under adaptation, because we want to target communities, we want to help communities to use conservation and adaptation policy to also reduce their vulnerability and their measures towards climate. And the third component has to do with infrastructure, so trying to adapt strategic infrastructure that could be and is now at risk due to the climate problem. So this is, in a nutshell, our NDC. And I would like just very briefly to touch on some things that we want to convey from the Paris Agreement. I know many here in the room know this by heart already, but for those that are new to the accounting topic. So Article 3 of the Paris Agreement and Article 4 give some indications of what we need to do in terms of the NDC and the communication of NDC. So NDCs, of course, is at the core of the Paris Agreement. We know that we have committed to have a progression of our ambition. There is a cycle already of having NDCs every 5 years. And there is also language that is very clear on that parties have committed to provide information that is necessary for clarity, transparency, and understanding. So many of us in the room have been discussing a lot of what we mean by this, what is the purpose of this, how we're gonna operationalize this. So all these very long words are now very much on everybody's mind now. And I think the important thing that I want to highlight is that this is something that is already committed. It's very important. It's at the core of the Paris Agreement. And Mexico would like to keep working on how to do this so that we can understand each other and really raise the ambition of the Paris Agreement. So another thing that is important and is also already in the agreement is the characteristics of this information. So we have decided to do emissions accounting. So we are really needing to get a number for those emissions. And there is not just a number, but we need also to have some characterization of the process to come up with these numbers. And we have, regarding the agreement, have environmental integrity, transparency, accuracy, completeness, comparability, consistency, and avoiding double counting. So all these, of course, needs a lot of guidance of how we do this in this new context of after Paris, where countries have really very different commitments, and there is no one common way to look at how we can account for each country's individual contribution, but also for everybody in the global stocktake. So this takes me to my last slide on the agreement, but I do think it's important to make the linkages of why this is happening, how we are structuring the conversation, and how we are translating Paris when we think about accounting. So the last part, of course, has to do with Article 13 and 14. So we do want to have an enhanced transparency framework. So that means we need to change from what we were doing, let's say business as usual in terms of information, but to think how we can become more transparent, how we can enhance this idea of communicating. And something that I think it's very important in the context after Paris is that we are not only communicating to the UNFCCC. Of course, we are doing that through the UNFCCC, but there is a lot of attention from non-stakeholders in our own constituencies at home to understand what we are committing to do. So I think I very much agree with the last panel on this issue, that it's important for us to be able to come up with this information and to facilitate the implementation of Paris through transparency. So of course, transparency is also about tracking progress, and I think there is also language in the agreement that this is not in order to point fingers. This is about helping countries to achieve the target, and this is both for mitigation and adaptation. It needs to take into account what we have in the inventories, because we do want to be able to make a global stocktake. And it also needs to track support, so on financial, technology, transfer, and capacity building for developing countries. So this is something that, of course, for us, the Paris Agreement, it's a balanced document. Of course, there is some guidance that will be focusing on mitigation, but the Paris Agreement overall should be able to track progress and make a global stocktake on means of implementation as well. So with this, I'm going to very quickly tell you about our inventory. So this is a picture of Mexico's emissions. And I'm not going to go into each of the colors, but as you can see, we have emissions in all different sectors of the economy. It's a very big economy, diversified economy. We have an important agricultural sector. We also have a lot of industry. We have an oil sector that is also very important. We have, of course, as many countries in the region, an important and growing transportation sector and electricity generation, which we also have an important component of natural gas. And the arrow that you see in the back is our estimation of the removals and coming from land use and land use change and forestry. So this is in our first board, the first time we computed that. We all know this is a difficult estimation to do. And we are making a lot of work on the inventory because we know this will be at the heart of information and accounting. So this is a quick highlight of both, I guess, the mid-century strategy and the NDC. And there needs to be, I guess what I want to convey here, there is already some estimation of where we are, where we want to be, and how we can get there. And what you can see in this picture is not only how Mexico's emissions could grow until 2050 without climate change action, but also how we have an NDC path and how this path can be more ambitious. So we are modeling the commitment that we already have and the area that we think could still be possible for 2030 and how can it speed our achievement of the 2050 goal. What we have in terms of report, well, of course, Mexico had its first board in 2015. We went through the ICA and FSB process. So it was a really important process. I think this is important to share with all countries. This is something that I think I would like to stress on the capacity building issue. I think it's identifying areas where you can improve. And of course, no country is going to say, oh, you didn't account for, like in a bad way. They will tell you, you need to think about how you use this emission factor. You need to think about some uncertainty issues. You're doing a lot of work in this category, but is this really a key category for you in the inventory? How can you balance your efforts? And I think that's very useful feedback. And we have upcoming the 6th national communications. So I think Mexico is one of the countries that have more national communications. And the last time I presented similar content in Mexico, someone from Paraguay was asking me, what have you learned from that many communications? And I think something that I would like to share with some countries that are doing the inventories is that it is very important. I think it's critical that we do develop the capacities in the national institutions. I've heard about many countries that are doing the national communications and the BURs through consultants. And at some point, Mexico also hired some consultants, right, to try to do that. And this national communication, we did everything in-house. We do have some support to do it, but we made them, even if we had some consultants on specific topics, we made them sit in the institute, work with our own team so that the knowledge is transferred to our team, because we know we are going to be doing this all the time. We need to be able to do it ourselves. So I think this is an important lessons learned from these reports. And we are also preparing our second BUR, so for next COP, wait for it. I think that something important from these reports is that we are moving all the inventory to 2006 methodologies. So this is something that you will be able to see in our next report. And we are also making a full review of literature for the short-lived climate forcers. There is a lot of interest of how we're computing these, what are the uncertainties on some of the specific parameters that come into this computation. And also, I want to just stress that, of course, when there is no methodology approved or adopted by the COP, one needs to use the methodologies that are in the literature. But what we wanted, and what's actually now happening, in part by proposed by Mexico but supported by many countries, is that this is something that the IPCC will look into. So now the Mission Task Force on Inventory has agreed to look at this topic, and we will be very engaged in the process of making progress on that from the scientific basis. And this is just to say that, of course, we know that it is always difficult for the convention to adopt some new methods, but we need to move on this. This is important for developing countries, but we want to do it with the best science and with the consensus of the community that needs to approve this. We also have a RED strategy, a national emissions registry, and this emissions registry is very detailed. It's targeting the industry. So there is methodologies and criteria and all those things that Camila mentioned that we need to establish when we want to track progress from the National Emissions Registry. It has a component for mitigation, which we are developing, and there is a lot of work to do that next year. We have a carbon tax. We have an evaluation that came out this year on the public budget and the public budget associated for climate action and the special program of climate change. So each administration will need to do a program, and this year, for the first time, we made an evaluation that was done by social representatives. It was not the government, and it was very useful for us to identify some of the issues. So I have 1 minute, so I want to share with you some of the specific activities that we've been doing with the project. We've done a lot of capacity building. So we are now, we did a workshop to discuss with stakeholders how could we do our national MRV system. You can see there the Ministry of, it was first this workshop with government agencies. So the Ministry of Environment, of course, INEC, SAGARPA, so this is the Ministry of Agriculture, the Commission for Forest, and the National Institute for Statistics. We also did different a different workshop just focusing on international lessons learned and good practices, transparency and mitigation of MRB accounting systems, and a specific training of how to do evaluations. So we really like this project, and in particular, we really have having our friends from Latin America joining these activities. I think we make friends, but we also learn a lot from what Costa Rica and Colombia are doing. So I think that's a really great part of our project. And finally, we are working towards this national MRB system. Through GIZ support, we are looking at specific issues that go from the legal components of these MRB systems in each of the sectors, and also how this needs to be done, thinking about the agreement, thinking about consistency and comparability, and how to ensure, of course, the certainty of the actions that we are taking and to be able to account for it. So thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you all for your attention.
Thanks, Claudia, for your very interesting presentation. We will now have the last presentation by Mr. Riyad Balaghi from the Climate Change Competence Center of Morocco. He will share with us their national experience on the improvement of the national inventory system as a also central element towards NDC accounting. Mr. Balaghi, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Daniel. I would like first to thank Costa Rica and the GIZ for the invitation. What I would like to show you today is our national inventory system, which is a set of institutional and technical arrangements. But I would like to focus more on the institutional arrangements, since the technical part is well known by all of you. It's just guidelines from UNFCCC and technical things that are easy to understand, I think, for most of you. Thank you. So our inventory system focus on 5 sectors: energy, industrial processes, agriculture, liquid and solid waste, and forest, land use, and land use change, which are the main contributors to the greenhouse gases emissions in Morocco, as identified or assessed by our third national communication to the UNFCCC. And then we are focusing on these sectors at the first hand, and we are trying to improve, first of all, the biannual report that was launched released in 2015. And of course, it will serve as transparency accounting procedures and system to the NDC of Morocco, the list emission development strategy, which is going to be released during this year, and of course the Sustainable National Development Strategy of Morocco, and the overall economic and social development of Morocco. In the last assessment of the biannual report, which was released in 2015, by the UNFCCC, some critical points have been highlighted to be improved. Of course, it was a first exercise, and then some technical issues have been identified, and then the inventory system of Morocco is trying to improve these aspects and we are now on the process of identifying the stakeholders, the main contributors to the improvement of the systems, which are mainly the research centers in Morocco, universities, and institutions that can be part of this institutional arrangement between all the sectors. and in order to build something that is sustainable in Morocco, not only relying on expertise or consultation from outside or within the countries. And that's the big part of the job that is intended to be done. And the objective is to have an inventory system that is comprehensive, accurate, and transparent, and can be understandable by everyone in Morocco, and to have the credibility and to keep to keep Morocco as a model country in Africa, as that combat climate change. And this system is, of course, managed at ministry level in Morocco by the Ministry of Sustainable Development, no more Environment Ministry. But since 2015, Morocco has built a dedicated institution, which is the 4C. The 4C is a capacity building institution that serves the implementation of climate change agenda in Morocco. And this institution, which is strongly supported by GIZ from the beginning, is in charge of managing the national inventory system in Morocco. And the institutional arrangement I was talking about is gathering key institutions that are in link with the sectors I presented at the beginning. The 4C, which is supported by GIZ, is coordinating the system. There is a coordinator in the 4C. The system is funded and, of course, is funded by GIZ. And in each sector, there is a coordinator which is in charge of collecting the data, ensuring that the data is well collected, is accurate, the methodology are well defined and well assessed. And in each sector and within each subsector, there are focal points that do the job of collecting the data. And this is the core component of our system, which is the institutional arrangement, because we want it to be sustainable at the long term and serve all the purposes of climate change policy in Morocco, including the NAMAs and the LEDs and the NDC and the Sustainable Development Strategy and so on. So, as I said, some critical points have been highlighted by the technical assessment of the UNFCCC, and we are working right now since 1 month ago on all the sectors to improve the inventory in Morocco in terms of data, quality of the data, in terms of sectors, in terms of projection, in terms of emission factors, and so on. And in order to have, at the end of the year, a second biannual update report that is consistent with the term of reference of the biannual update report all over the world, and also that can be served in the second step of improving of our NDC toward to 2020 and beyond, each 5 year beyond to 2020. And I hear there are some points, technical points that should be improved. I don't want to go in details in them, but as you see, we are also improving the capacity building of this institution through intensive training that are supported by GIZ from the beginning, and still there are There are hand-on training for this institution so that they continue providing the system with data, with better data, more accurate data, and comprehensive data, and complete data. And the time being, we are also thinking with GIZ, we are thinking about building an IT system like in Costa Rica, and building an IT system which is gonna manage all the data very quickly and an easy manner and transparency manner. I appreciate the fact that it's an open source. It is viewed as an open source. It's, I think it's a basis for sustainability, that open source and done internally. And it's a lesson learned for Morocco that we can also think, and maybe we can exchange with you how you, first of all, designed and what were the term of reference of this design. And also we want also that the system we be something that is strongly at the basis of all climate change policy in Morocco, and that serve all the sectors in Morocco in the long term. And thank you very much.
Riyad for this presentation. We are a bit out of time. We still have some food waiting for us. It doesn't get cold, but still time is short. I'd therefore just like to ask Anke Herold to also join the panel. We actually had prepared some input also for Anke, who has been following MOV and accounting discussions since ever. I think we can say that. But I'd actually like to leave the decision about what's most interesting to you up to the panel. So if you have any questions, I think we still can take some, and afterwards definitely discuss outside with the snacks in the hands. Thanks, I think you were first. And please state from where you come and to whom you direct your question.
Yes, I'm Deepak Dasgupta. I'm from Terry in India. And I'm coming at this question at a slightly different angle, which is we are interested, I'm interested in the finance part of the story and its links to the exercise. And really what, obviously, excellent presentations, by the way, thank you so much. You're obviously interested in the metadata at the end of the day in terms of the negotiations. Finance is interested in the microdata, which is we are interested in financing projects, and we are interested in a very strong MRV process that has identifiable, clearly identifiable and accurate as much as we can in terms of, and I would like any views from the panel as to how you see especially private financial institutions which are thinking of picking up aggregated small-scale projects coming for financing globally. How do you think your system may or may not be able to help us? So anyone who wants to respond, thank you.
Okay, maybe we take directly the second question, yeah?
My name is Mark Pershin from Less Meat, Less Heat, also a member of the Put Climate on Pause Coalition. So my question goes through the whole panel. Thank you, wonderful presentations, all very fascinating. I took photos of pretty much every slide. Yeah, my question is all about, so in the national inventories and in terms of transparency, when we account for greenhouse gas emissions, we use the GWP 100 metric, which underestimates the true short-term impact of things like methane and other short-lived climate pollutants. So have any of your systems factored this in to the reporting, perhaps the dual metric approach or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe first respond those two questions before taking another on finance. I don't know if maybe you, Camilla, who have a quite advanced financial monitoring system, might like to ask the first one.
Of course. Thank you for the questions. About the financial system, we have been working with the National Planning Department and the Ministry of Finance of the country, trying to advance in how to understand and how to gather this micro data of finance. It has been easier with public finance because it's more centralized information in the country, so you know that you have a national budget and that this national budget is distributed in the local governments and in the other national institutions. So you just have to identify where is the data. And the tricky thing here is how to identify if one investment or expense is a climate change investment or not. So, and this is very tricky both for mitigation and adaptation. So we work like for more than 1 year with experts from different institutions of the country, trying to identify which of the investments and the categories can be categorized by this way, like it is a climate investment or no. We had to evaluate line by line. Okay, these are all the investments of the public budget in the country, so we had to analyze one by one. For the private sector is more difficult. There are a lot of things here. The first one is that sometimes private sector doesn't even know that they are investing in some things or projects that actually helps to climate change for adaptation or mitigation. So when you ask them, they're like, no, climate change, where is that? Or other stage of the information is that they know it, but the national government cannot gather the information in a systematic way. So we have been working a lot in one of the committees that I show you in the presentation, that is the financial one, trying to to build capacities in the private sector by different campaigns and methods, and also by working with banks, for example, development banks and like first floor banks, trying to have better information about all the resources that they move around the country. And we are like trying to work with, for example, we try to use the work that we made for the voluntary reporting system that the private sector was interested in the country to develop, to explain them the importance of these things also, so they can identify the information and try to share the data with us. But it's been a long process, and also after you identify where the information is and try to create the capacities on those stakeholders to them to identify the information is useful for us. You have to create like this culture of reporting and to create the information system. So the National Registry of Mitigation Actions give us some part of the information. For example, if you have a CDM project or any kind of project for climate change, and it has a private investment inside, we can gather the information by that way. But there are some things that we know that we haven't seen from the national perspective today. We are trying to improve in that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Camila, thanks a lot. I mean, especially this small piece of the cake, finance is more complex. than anything, and there would be a lot to discuss. Unfortunately, we don't have any time left. I mean, it's definitely sure that, especially for this financing MOV, you need another system than for getting a picture of the whole mitigation at the NDC level. But I invite you to join us outside. We still have some snacks. All panelists will stay. You are open to discuss with them the question with the MOV. I just can refer you directly to Anke Herold. She has quite some experience, I think, on especially this question of metrics, also of different GHGs. Thanks for your attendance. Please stay with us, have some food and drinks, and if you want to have further information on the project, just visit the transparency-partnership.net homepage. There you will find further information on the project and also other related information. Thanks a lot.